I have the gold, I have the power, I have all the money, yet no peace, no happiness. What have I gotten myself into?
They say money speaks, but Julius's wealth didn't just speak. He cried out. It echoed with the names of the innocent, and it whispered from the dark shadows of a secret he could no longer hide. Julius found a shortcut to the top, but he forgot one thing. The devil never gives a gift. He only gives a loan. And tonight, the debt is due. And this debt is not paid in money. It is paid in the lives of those he loves. Today, we witness the terrifying fall of a man who traded his peace for paper, only to find out you cannot negotiate with the darkness. Welcome to part 2 of this story. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, the link is in the description below. You need to see how Julius started this journey before you see how it ends. Like this video, subscribe to this channel and tell us where in the world you are watching from. Now, let's get into the story. 3 months had passed since the 2 schoolgirls from Umans vanished into the maw of the forest, and the air in Omuero had turned toxic with suspicion. The village was no longer the place Julius remembered. The evening markets, once vibrant with the smell of roasted corn and the sound of haggling, now closed before the sun even touched the horizon. Mothers walked with their daughters gripped tightly by the wrists, and the men of the village had formed a local vigilante group, patrolling the dusty roads with rusted machetes and a newfound hunger for justice. Inside the towering gates of his mansion, Julius was a king in a golden tomb. To the outside world, he was the success story of the century. He had 4 luxury SUVs parked in a garage that stayed climate-controlled. His living room featured a television so large it covered an entire wall, and his dining table was carved from a single piece of imported mahogany. But Julius didn't use any of it. He had stopped sitting at the table because the reflection in the polished wood showed him faces he didn't want to see. He had stopped watching the television because the static sounded like the screams of Sarah and Chinyu. I have the gold. I have the power. Every man in this village bows when I drive past. So why do I feel like I am drowning in a shallow grave? Why does the expensive steak taste like the red mud of my father's farm? I escaped the poverty of the stomach, but I have entered the poverty of the spirit. Julius's mental state was deteriorating like a corpse in the sun. He had become a ghost haunting his own hallways. He no longer slept in the master suite with its Egyptian cotton sheets. The room was too big, too full of corners where shadows could hide. Instead, he dragged a thin mattress into his walk-in closet, surrounded by his designer suits, and slept with a loaded double-barrel shotgun clutched against his chest. Every creak of the mansion's foundation, every whistle of the wind through the gold-trimmed vents, made him bolt upright, sweat pouring down his face, his finger trembling on the trigger. He had become obsessed with cleanliness. He spent hours scrubbing the marble floors of the foyer with harsh chemicals, his knuckles raw and bleeding, trying to wash away the scent of damp, rotting earth that seemed to follow him everywhere. No matter how much lavender incense he burned, he could still smell the forest of no return. Then the subscription notice arrived. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't a phone call. It was a cold, wet sensation that began at the base of his spine and crawled up to his brain. He was standing in front of his gold-leafed vanity mirror when his reflection suddenly stopped moving. The Julius in the mirror stayed still while the real Julius moved his hand. The reflection's eyes turned a milky, cataract white, and its mouth opened to reveal the jagged yellow teeth of the ritualist. "The moon is growing fat again, Julius," the voice hissed, vibrating through the glass and into Julius's skull. "The spirits are bored of the girls from Umans. Their blood has gone cold. The subscription is due. If you do not bring a fresh harvest by the next full moon, I will come to collect the interest. And the interest is your own beating heart." Julius collapsed to the floor, sobbing into his hands. He was frantic. He spent the next 3 days driving his SUV to neighboring villages, his eyes bloodshot, his hair unkempt despite his expensive clothes. He looked like a madman in a tuxedo. He tried to use his old tricks, pretending his car was broken, offering scholarships to girls walking home from school, waving bundles of cash out the window. But the world had changed. The disappearing girls were the talk of every radio station and every palm wine joint. The girls he approached didn't see a big man anymore. They saw a predator. They saw the desperation in his eyes and the way his hands shook. They crossed the street. They ran into the bush. They spat on the ground after his car passed. Julius was the hunter, but he was trapped in a forest where the prey had learned to bite back. He was the richest man in Omuero, but as he sat in the dark of his mansion, jumping at every shadow and clutching his gun, he realized that the real price wasn't just the lives he took, it was the fact that he would never ever be at peace again. Just when he thought he could take no more, a knock came at the gate. A knock that would change the course of his destiny forever. The sun was beginning to set on a Tuesday afternoon when the heavy iron gates of the mansion creaked open. Julius, peering through the gap in his silk curtains with the eyes of a hunted animal, felt his heart skip a beat. A young woman stood there, dusty from the road but radiant, clutching a floral-patterned suitcase and a stack of nursing textbooks. It was Grace. At 22, Grace was the shining star of the entire lineage. She was the daughter of Julius's younger brother, the same brother who had shared his meager portions of yam with Julius when they were both starving on the farm. She had a laugh that sounded like silver bells and a heart so pure it made the shadows in Julius's living room seem to shrink back in shame. "Uncle Julius! Surprise!" she screamed as he opened the door. She threw her arms around him, and for a moment the smell of the forest, that scent of rot and damp earth, was replaced by the smell of lavender and laundry soap. "Grace," Julius whispered, his voice cracking. What are you doing here? Omuero is not safe these days." "I came to spend my mid-semester break with my favorite uncle," she cheered, dancing into the marble foyer, her jaw dropping as she looked at the crystal chandelier. "Papa said you were blessed, but I didn't know you lived in heaven. Look at this floor. I can see my own face in it." As Grace spun around in circles, marveling at the velvet sofas and the gold-leafed picture frames, Julius felt a cold, sharp blade of realization cut through his chest. He didn't see a niece. He didn't see the little girl he used to carry on his shoulders. In the twisted, darkened chambers of his mind, he saw a life insurance policy. The internal monologue of a man losing his mind. The Ritualist said the spirits are bored of strangers. They want blood that matches mine. They want a heart that beats with the same rhythm. If I give them grace, the debt is cleared. Can sleep again. I can stop clutching this gun. I can stop smelling the dirt. One life. One tiny, beautiful life. In exchange for my kingdom. Is it not a fair trade? I am the head of this family. My life is worth more than a student's. God will understand. He must. The following week was a psychological torture. Grace was the perfect guest. She cooked the traditional soups Julius used to love. She cleaned the corners of the house he was too afraid to enter, and she sat by his feet in the evenings, telling him about her dreams of opening a clinic in the village to help the poor. "Uncle," she said one night, her hand resting on his knee, "you have so much. You could change so many lives. Why do you look so sad? It's as if the gold is weighing you down." Julius snapped his leg away as if her touch had burned him. "You know nothing of the weight of gold, Grace. Go to bed." The night of the full moon arrived like a funeral shroud. The sky was the color of a bruised plum, and the moon hung low and heavy, looking like a giant, unblinking eye. Julius sat in his study watching the clock. 11:45 p.m. The air in the room suddenly turned to ice. The fine cognac in his glass froze solid. A shadow stretched across the wall, a shadow with long skeletal fingers that reached toward the hallway where Grace was sleeping. "The moon is at its peak, Julius," the Ritualist's voice hissed from the shadows of the ceiling. "The subscription is overdue. Bring her to the clearing. Bring her now, or I will take you both, and I will start with your eyes." Julius stood up. His legs felt like they were made of lead, but his heart was a cold stone. He walked to the guest room and turned the brass handle. Grace was fast asleep, her breathing steady and peaceful. She looked like an angel carved from mahogany. "Grace," he whispered, shaking her shoulder. "Grace, wake up. There is an emergency." She sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Uncle, is it your heart? Are you having an attack?" No, Julius lied, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I just received a call. Your father. He has been involved in an accident on the road near the forest. Car is stuck. We must go now to help him. We cannot wait for the morning." Grace didn't even put on shoes. She grabbed her shawl and ran to the door, her face white with terror for her father. "Is he okay? Uncle, let's go. Why are we standing here?" They stepped out into the night. Julius didn't take the SUV. He claimed the engine wouldn't start and that the forest path was a shortcut. They walked into the forest of no return, the tall grass whispering like 1,000 gossiping ghosts. Grace gripped Julius's hand so tightly her knuckles were white. "Uncle, I'm scared. The trees. They look like they are moving," she whimpered. "Don't look at the trees, Grace," Julius said, his voice as flat and dead as a tombstone. "Look at the path." They reached the clearing. The ritualist was already there, standing atop the black stone altar, his arms outstretched like a predatory bird. Grace stopped, her breath hitching in her throat. She looked at the man, then at the blood-stained stone, then at her uncle. "Uncle, where is Papa? Who is this man?" Julius didn't answer. He simply stepped back, releasing her hand. "Uncle?" she asked again, her voice rising into a high, thin scream of realization. "Uncle. Oh, please." Julius didn't wait to see the ritualist move. He didn't wait to hear the end of the scream that shattered the night. He turned and ran. He ran through the thorns that tore at his silk robes. He ran until his lungs felt like they were on fire. By the time he reached the gates of his mansion, the moon had begun to fade. He stumbled into his living room and collapsed on the marble floor. Suddenly his phone chimed. Credit alert. 100 million.00. The wealth had doubled. The numbers on the screen were so large they didn't even seem real. Julius looked up at the gold-leafed walls. They seemed to glow with a new, terrifying brilliance. But as he sat there in his millions, he realized the silence in the mansion had changed. It was no longer the silence of an empty house. It was the silence of a grave. He walked to the kitchen and saw Grace's half-drunk cup of tea still sitting on the counter. He saw her nursing textbooks on the table. He had everything he ever wanted. He was safe. He was rich beyond his wildest dreams. But as the sun rose over Omuero, Julius looked in the mirror and realized that he had finally paid the ultimate subscription. He had traded his family for paper, and now, he had to live in the silence of his own betrayal. A month had passed since Grace's disappearance, and the mansion had become a palace of madness. Julius was now the wealthiest man in the 3 surrounding states. His bank account was a fortress of zeros, and he had recently imported a gold-plated SUV that sat in his driveway like a shimmering idol. But inside, Julius was rotting. He had become addicted to the high of the credit alerts. Every time the numbers increased, the fear in his chest subsided for an hour, replaced by a cold, metallic pride. But the silence in the house was now a physical entity. He would walk past Grace's room and hear the phantom sound of her turning the pages of her nursing textbooks. He would sit in the kitchen and smell her favorite vegetable soup, only to find the pots cold and empty. The ritualist's voice was no longer a whisper. It was a command. The gold is thirsty, Julius. The mansion needs to breathe. One more. Just one more. And the forest will grant you 10 years of peace. 10 years to be a king. 10 years to forget the faces. Julius didn't even fight it anymore. His soul had become a dry, cracked riverbed. He was no longer a man. He was a machine built to serve the forest. On a humid Thursday evening, Julius dressed himself in his most humble farming clothes, the tattered shirt and the worn-out trousers he kept in a secret chest. He rubbed charcoal on his face to hide his rich man's glow, and drove a beat-up, rusted pickup truck to the market square of a village far beyond Omuero. He parked near the tall elephant grass at the edge of the market road and waited. Finally he saw her. Amara. She was a young woman, perhaps 19, carrying a heavy basket of yams and plantains on her head. She looked tired, her feet dusty from the long trek. She was exactly what the forest craved: youth, innocence, and a heart full of simple dreams. Julius stepped out of the truck, feigning a limp. "Please, my daughter," he called out, his voice cracking with a practiced, grandfatherly kindness. "This old man's legs have failed him. My truck has broken down, and I have no way to get these bags of seed to my farm. Could you help me hold this light while I check the engine?" Amara stopped. She saw a man who reminded her of her own grandfather, someone who had worked the earth until his back was bent. "Of course, Papa," she said, setting her basket down. As she leaned over the engine, Julius felt the familiar wave of nausea, but he pushed it down with the thought of his gold-plated SUV. He reached into the cabin and pulled out a small, chilled bottle of water. "You look thirsty, my daughter. Drink this first. It is a long walk to the next village." Amara smiled, thanked him, and drank. Within 5 minutes, the sedative, the same dark chemical Julius had used before, took hold. Her eyes glazed over, her knees buckled, and Julius caught her before she hit the dirt. He threw a heavy, oil-stained tarpaulin over her and hoisted her into the back of the truck. He didn't see the eyes watching from the shadows. Deborah was a quiet, sharp-eyed woman from the village. She had been hiding in the tall grass, waiting for her brother to return from the farm, when she saw the luxury-looking man in the poor man's clothes. She had noticed the way Julius's hands didn't match his rags. They were too soft, too clean. She had watched him give the girl the water. She had seen him throw her like a sack of grain into the truck. Deborah didn't scream. She knew that if she screamed now, the man with the cold eyes would kill her too. Instead, she became a ghost. As Julius drove toward the forest of no return, Deborah ran. She knew the shortcuts through the thickets, the paths that only the local hunters used. She moved like a shadow through the trees, her heart pounding against her ribs like a drum. Julius reached the edge of the ritual site. The moon was a sliver of silver in the sky. He dragged the unconscious Amara toward the stone altar, his breath hitching in his chest. The air grew cold, and the ritualist emerged from the trees, his bark-like skin shimmering in the moonlight. "You are early, Julius," the ritualist hissed. "The forest is pleased." Julius raised the ritual blade, a jagged piece of obsidian he had been given. But just as the steel touched the moonlight, he froze. Clack! A dry branch had snapped in the darkness behind him. Julius spun around, his eyes wild, sweat pouring down his face, soaking into his poor man's rags. "Who's there?" he shrieked. "I have a gun. Show yourself." Silence. He scanned the tree line. The shadows seemed to be mocking him, dancing in the wind. He couldn't see Deborah, who was pressed flat against the trunk of a massive iroko tree. Her hand clamped over her mouth to stop herself from sobbing. "It is only the wind, Julius," the ritualist mocked. "Finish the work. The blood must be warm." Julius turned back to the altar, but his hands were shaking so hard he nearly dropped the blade. He felt a presence, 1,000 eyes watching him from the dark. He felt Grace. He felt Sarah. He felt Chinyu. And for the first time, he felt a fear that his money could not buy his way out of. Deborah didn't wait any longer. She turned and fled back toward the village, her feet flying over the roots and stones. She didn't go home. She ran straight to the village square, where the men were gathered around a fire. "The king!" she screamed, her voice shattering the night. "The king of Omuero is a butcher. He has Amara at the shrine. Follow me if you want to see the devil in the flesh." The night air in Omuero was thick, not with the usual scent of wood smoke and roasting corn, but with the electric charge of a coming storm. In the village square, the fire Deborah had ignited with her words was spreading faster than any bushfire in the harmattan. Julius, the men whispered, their faces illuminated by the flickering orange glow of torches. The same Julius who gave us the borehole. The same Julius who drives the gold car. I saw him. Deborah screamed, her chest heaving, her eyes wild with the horror of what she had witnessed at the edge of the forest of no return. He wears the clothes of a beggar to catch our daughters like fish in a net. He has Amara on the stone right now. If we do not move, her blood will be on all our hands. The transition from shock to white-hot rage happened in a heartbeat. It was a communal roar, a sound that started in the bellies of the mothers who had lost children and ended in the throats of the men who had felt small in the shadow of Julius's wealth. They didn't grab their hats. They grabbed their machetes. They didn't grab their lanterns. They grabbed cans of kerosene. The race against time had begun. At the hidden shrine, Julius was a man unraveling. The obsidian blade in his hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Amara lay still on the cold stone, her breathing shallow, her face peaceful in its drugged slumber. She looked so much like Grace that for a second Julius's vision blurred. "The blood, Julius," the ritualist hissed, his form blending into the gnarled roots of the ancient trees. "The moon is waiting. The stars are hungry. Why do you hesitate? You have done this before. You traded the strangers. You traded the girl of your own house. What is one more?" "I heard something," Julius whimpered, his eyes darting toward the dark tree-line. "I felt eyes on me. Someone was here. Only the ghosts of your choices, Julius. Now, finish it, or the subscription will be taken from your own chest." Julius raised the blade. He looked at Amara's throat. He thought of the bank alerts. He thought of the gold-plated SUV. He thought of the way David looked at him with envy. He closed his eyes, ready to strike. "Julius!" The shout didn't come from a ghost. It came from 100 living, breathing, vengeful voices. A wave of light broke through the trees. Torches, dozens of them, were flooding the clearing. The village elders, the youth, and the grieving fathers burst through the brush like a physical wall of judgment. The dogs of the village led the way, their barking echoing off the ancient stones of the shrine. Julius froze, the ritual blade held high above his head. In the flickering torchlight, he didn't look like a king. He looked like a demon caught in the middle of a prayer. He was still wearing his poor man's rags, but the gold watch on his wrist, the one he had forgotten to take off, glinted mockingly in the firelight. "Amara!" her father shrieked, lunging forward with a strength born of desperation. The confrontation was violent and public. The men of Omuero swarmed the altar. Julius tried to swing the blade, but he was tackled to the red earth he had tried so hard to escape. They dragged him away from the girl, his face hitting the dirt, the charcoal he had used to disguise himself mixing with his own sweat and blood. "It's not what it looks like," Julius screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. "I can pay you. I have millions. I will build a school for everyone. I will give you all cars. Just let me go. Can your millions bring back Grace?" An elder roared, stepping forward and smashing a heavy wooden staff into the ground beside Julius's head. "Can your cars drive the dead back from the forest?" The ritualist was gone. Like a shadow when a light is turned on, the entity had vanished, leaving Julius to face the human consequences of a spiritual debt. There was no magic to save him now. There was no gold that could bribe a father whose daughter was almost slaughtered. The mob didn't kill him there. They wanted him to see the end of his empire. They dragged him back to the village, his feet scraping against the gravel, his fine silk robes, which they found in his truck, trailing in the dust. When they reached the mansion, the sight was biblical. The women of the village had already arrived. The iron gates had been torn from their hinges. The gold-plated SUV was a mangled heap of metal, smashed by heavy stones and sledgehammers. "No, not the house," Julius begged, falling to his knees. "Anything but the house. I worked for it. I sacrificed for it. But the people of Omuero were done with his blessings. A young man, the brother of one of the missing girls, tossed a lit torch into the open foyer. The silk curtains caught fire instantly. The expensive Italian furniture, the Persian rugs, the mahogany tables, everything Julius had traded souls for, became fuel for a cleansing fire. Julius watched as the flames licked the gold-leafed walls. He watched as the roof of his kingdom collapsed in a shower of sparks, the crystal chandelier shattering on the marble floor with a sound like 1,000 souls breaking at once. The heat was so intense it singed his eyebrows, but he couldn't look away. In the fire, he saw the faces of Sarah, Chinyu, and Grace. They weren't screaming anymore. They were smiling as the gold melted into nothingness and flowed like liquid tears down the driveway. By dawn, the great mansion of Omuero was a blackened skeleton, a jagged tooth of charcoal sticking out of the earth. Julius sat in the dirt, surrounded by the charred remains of his life. His cars were gone. His money, stored in digital banks he could no longer access without a phone that had burned in the fire, was useless to him. The villagers didn't even put him in prison. They simply turned their backs on him. They left him there in the ashes. He was a man in tattered rags, covered in soot, with nothing left but the memory of the blood on his hands. He spent the rest of his days wandering the village roads, a madman talking to shadows. He would stop at every young girl he saw and whisper, "Is the subscription paid? Is it paid yet?" His soul was shattered, leaving him a hollow shell of a man who finally realized that the real price of wealth was not the gold he gained, but the man he used to be. And as for his family, the wife who had once loved him and the children who were his pride, they were gone long before the fire ever touched the mansion. When the truth of the blood money began to leak like a poisoned well, his wife didn't wait for the village to arrive. She took their 2 children in the dead of night, carrying nothing but their clothes and her dignity. She chose to raise them in a single room in a far-off city, living on humble earnings rather than stay in a palace built on graves. Julius died 1,000 deaths before his heart even stopped beating. He learned the hardest way possible that a man who trades his peace for paper will always end up bankrupt. He thought he was buying a kingdom, but he was only building a prison with gold-plated bars. Let this be a reminder to everyone watching: true happiness and lasting peace cannot be found in a ritual or a secret bargain. It can only come from God and the work of honest hands. Don't let the glitter of the world blind you to the darkness of the price. Because the devil never gives you anything for free. He only lends it to you until he is ready to take everything you are. And by then, no amount of gold can buy back your soul. But today, I don't want to leave you with fear. I want to leave you with a prayer. I pray for everyone watching this right now who is struggling, feeling like they are behind in life, or feeling the pressure to take a shortcut. May the Almighty God open the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing that adds no sorrow. May He protect your children from the eyes of the wicked. I decree that your breakthrough will come through honest labor and divine favor, and when it comes, you will sleep in peace and wake up in joy. If you receive this prayer, just type Amen in the comments to claim it for your family. I'm Gloria. Thank you for watching. If this story spoke to your spirit, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs this light today. Until next time, stay blessed, stay protected, and stay true.